With so many major cities in Ukraine currently under siege from Russian forces, it's hard to conceive what life is like for the civilians who haven't been able to escape.
Let's speak to Iuliia Osmolovski, a former Ukrainian diplomat and executive director of the Eastern European Security Institute, who is currently in Kyiv. Iuliia, firstly, can I check that you are well and safe, and can you give us an update of what's been happening where you are?
Well, I'm relatively well and safe compared to those my colleagues who are right now stuck in the eastern cities of Ukraine. In Kyiv, it's relatively. However, we do expect some new attacks and rocket attacks on the city, and some parts of Kyiv and mostly suburbs in north and east and west had been destroyed completely by Russian forces, by missiles and rockets. So, for God's sake, I'm always fine so far. Thank you.
Iuliia, we obviously wish you all the very best. We just wondered what morale is like amongst Ukrainians at the moment. There was a poll that came out yesterday from Lord Ashcroft here, who'd done some polling of Ukrainians, which showed that 85% of men and 63% of women said they were willing to take up arms and fight. And is that the kind of is that what you would recognise? Would you recognise those figures from what you've been from speaking to people in Ukraine?
Yeah, sure. This is something that we call Putin paradox. It means that he has something like to put control on Ukraine, to get Ukraine split it into two parts, and with the means that he using to achieve these goals, he received completely opposite results, because the level of resistance here is extremely high, and those people, those Ukrainians speaking Russian or Ukrainian, it doesn't matter, because they help each other and they are very decisive in their resistance towards the Russian invaders. So I think that we have to thank Putin for making this more stronger unity among Ukrainians, and it is definitely no longer the case of talking about two parts of Ukraine splitting apart.
There was another poll result here, and it said 56% of Ukrainian people thought the conflict would be over at the end of March, and only 9% thought that it would last longer than 6 months. What do you think to that?
Well, it's difficult to assess, especially from my point of being an expert and trying to analyze all the possible scenarios and development. From one hand, definitely there are hopes that Russians are just getting weaker in their campaign, because they just calculated that it would last from 1 to 3 days to conquer Kyiv, and they haven't achieved that. So, and they've got all their logistics and supply chains to their troops broken so far, so they can't support them. For instance, we have some Russian troops standing not far from Kyiv and 25 kilometers distance, and they are not approaching Kyiv just because they don't have sufficient support for that so far. So there are some predictions, and I do rely here on the assessment of Christa Grozdy from Bellingcat, who said that till Sunday Russians' ability to attack will be drawn up. But also we do understand that listening to Russian claims, because they haven't still withdrawn the initial ultimatum, like Ukraine should get rid of its NATO and EU aspirations, we have to recognize Crimea as a Russian territory, and we have to recognize so-called independent republics in the east. So they're still trying to put this case forward in negotiations. That means they don't feel themselves being on a weak position. Therefore, there are assessments that conflict might last longer than just 3 days or 2 weeks.
What would you like to see the international community doing? Is there more that you think they should be doing to assist Ukraine?
Yes, they've done definitely much more than we had expected at the beginning, and especially before the invasion, because I think that eventually the Western partners had realized the real threat coming from Russia, and they understood that if they don't support Ukraine right now, so next in line would be some countries of Eastern Europe, like Poland and Baltics, because Putin also claimed that there are some disputable territorial issues with Poland and with Baltics. So it's definitely next logical step to expect from Russia. But on the other hand, the key issue right now, which we are asking for, it's a no-fly zone over Ukraine, because Russians being failed in their blitzkrieg campaign, they started just to do extermination war and the war to extinction. So they try just to shell the cities of Ukraine up to the very ruins for all the civilians not to survive in it. So it means that we definitely need the NATO partners to stay strong on this no-fly zone. And we know that today or tomorrow they will be voting in Congress on the same issue. And we also know that the general public worldwide supports no-fly zone over Ukraine. And listening to what you've been discussing a bit earlier than I appeared on your TV, I know that one of the psychological fears is that this would mean direct interaction of NATO and Russia. But it has already happened in Ukrainian soil, because what Russians say, they say that it means that Russia in direct war with NATO countries, but they're fighting on Ukrainian soil.
Iuliia Osmolovska, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best. Stay safe, and we wish you and your fellow Ukrainians all the very best.